that. We're going to be live in a second and we'll get started. I want to thank the members so much for being here, and thank you for all your work, and council and staff as well for putting all these briefings together for us. It takes a lot of work as well. So let me know when I can start. Okay, wonderful. So good afternoon and welcome to the House Health and Government Operations Committee. I'm Jocelyn Peña-Melnick, Chair of the Health and Government Operations Committee. I am going to be joined in a second, and she and I just finished a meeting. So she's wrapping it up for me by my Vice Chair, Delegate Bonnie Collison. I kindly ask for your patience if we encounter any technical or streaming issues. It happens. Hasn't happened yet. But it does happen. This briefing is being streamed on the Maryland General Assembly YouTube channel. Before this briefing, all members were emailed a copy of each presentation. If you do not have this document, please let committee staff know and we will send you a copy, but I know you have it because we have the best staff, okay? As well, and council as well, right? Please adhere to our usual committee rules of one question and one answer from the panel, not one question and one answer from each panelist. Please, I just turned my phone silent. Turn your phone off. Please keep your questions brief because the longer they are, the longer we are here. Please keep in mind that this briefing is scheduled to conclude, guess what? 2:45. Let's see if we can do it. Today, the House Health and Government Operations Committee will hear an overview from the Department of Information Technology. We will also hear from John Hopkins on their use of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And we will begin with Secretary Savage from the Department of Information Technology. Secretary Savage, will you please come forward and bring whoever you need to help you address questions if there are questions. I want to take a minute to thank our wonderful Delegate Shalega and her granddaughter for the baked goods that they provided to us. Those amazing goods. I actually ate too many of them and took home. My husband, he actually loved them. We want to thank you, and please thank her for us, okay? And tell her that she can keep baking.
You're welcome, and make the request known. They are taking requests. I think maybe chocolate chip cookies on Monday.
Oh, tell her that yes, we are putting in our request, and tell her to watch this video. Tell them thank you so much. Oh, I'll tell you. Thank you so much for your baked goods. The committee loves them. Keep them coming, okay? And we love grandma, your grandma. All right.
Madam Chair, may I please that if it's at all possible, we can get some gluten-free chocolate chip cookies. Thank you
All right,
so much.
Thank you. Secretary Savage, do you have a request?
I really love oatmeal raisins.
So, so good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. I want to take a minute on behalf of the committee to thank you for your patience this last summer and fall, where we had so many meetings on AI and emails, and then you had so many meetings with other people. And I want to thank you for going the extra mile. It really made things easier, and we hope to keep that collaboration. There's a few bills, and we would like your input on that as well. I have actually requested Senator Hester and Delegate Jas Lewis to get in touch with you. Those bills will be assigned to the Government Operations Subcommittee, but it will be great to have them worked out beforehand. And I encourage everyone to meet with all the people that you have bills and try to work things out. It makes the process very smooth. But I personally wanted to thank you and your staff, okay?
Oh, we really appreciate that. And we appreciate your leadership in facilitating the collaboration between the executive side and the legislative side. I believe that Nishant is meeting with Senator Hester and Delegate Lewis this afternoon. So we'll keep you apprised of that, but we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate on it.
Absolutely. So thank you for indulging us for a second or two, right? And you can get started.
Great. Well, Madam Chair, thank you. And members of the committee, thank you so much for hearing us this afternoon. I will be brief. I just wanted to sort of set the stage with the team I've built since joining the organization about a year ago. My role as secretary is really to create the conditions to bring modern user-centered technology to the state. So I'll be brief and then turn it over to the experts I've brought on to the staff. So what I want to focus on as secretary for the length of my tenure are really 3 top priorities. Number 1, clarifying our product and service offerings. I'm sure many of you have been in the state for a long time and know that the centralization and then sort of the reverse, the centralization of IT has caused a lot of confusion in the state agencies. So we're doing our best to help clarify, what are the core Do-It product and service offerings that agencies can rely on us for. The second is maturing our cybersecurity efforts. The Office of Security Management, which Lance is a part of, is a relatively new organization. There's been quite a lot of investment in that team, but we have a long ways to go in terms of offering centralized cyber managed services across the state. So that's the second top priority. And then the third, which we actually announced last week, which is really exciting, is launching a digital experience team. So a brand new vertical that I created coming in as secretary, and I'm very grateful to have the leadership of Marcy Jacobs leading that team, is to bring digital experience and development operations staff in-house. I really want to create a culture at Do-It where we have engineers, security engineers, data scientists, product managers, UI, UX people on staff to help guide technology in the state. So those are my top 3 priorities. And I think you'll see how this work is being operationalized by my colleagues who are presenting to you this afternoon. So briefly, I won't spend too much time on the org structure, but if you're interested, it's coming in at Do-It, and we've changed the team a bit. You'll see we continue to have the administrative side, the technology side, or the operations side, which encompasses Network Maryland, Maryland First, our service desk, our software as a service platform, so applications and data. Marcy will be speaking to the new team she's creating, which is web, products, major IT development projects. Lance will be speaking a bit to the work of the cybersecurity team. Since coming in, myself, the acting CISO, Greg Rogers, and I have built out a couple of new components to the Office of Security Management, including cyber operations, cyber resilience. We just onboarded the state's first ever governance, risk, and compliance officer, and then continuing to build out cyber initiatives, which include centrally managed cyber services. And then, of course, you'll hear from Nishant. Nishant also reports to me as the state's first senior advisor for AI. So with that, I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Marcy Jacobs, first Chief Digital Experience Officer we've had in the States. She's really doing an incredible job to bring digital experience and talent, and she'll walk you through really what that means and some of the tactics that we're taking in our first year.
Do I push something?
I think you're on.
They're on. Okay. You don't have to do anything. I know it's confusing, right? You feel like you want to touch them.
Yeah.
It is. Go ahead. I'll try not to touch anything. Thank you, Secretary Savage, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to talk to you about what is the vision for the Maryland Digital Service? What are the things that we are going to work on? And really kind of the North Star or the aspiration that we're focused on is making engaging with Maryland government easy and intuitive and secure.
And you're
So-
Marcy Jacobs, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So the focus of the team is looking at how do we start with people? How do we not start with technology, but thinking about kind of a new way of working, a new way of approaching how our constituents engage with technology and really designing for the way they want to engage. So if we can go to the next slide. So there are 2 core outcomes that my team is driving. One is really kind of thinking about how do we design the right products? And I intentionally use the word design because I think that is a step that is sometimes missed in government technology. I've seen this in my experience with the federal government. Thinking about design from the lens of understanding users, understanding content, understanding user journeys, and truly designing technology to match people's needs. The other piece of this is building or buying products in a different way. So thinking about truly being agile, thinking about what is the smallest thing that we can build or buy to start impacting problems, but also give us an opportunity to learn and maybe not gold plate solutions or think exhaustively about every single requirement we might ever have. So this kind of manifests in 3 core pillars. One is around websites. We have a lot of websites in the state, and I would say that they are maybe not doing as well as they could to answer the questions of our customers. The next pillar is around applications and systems. How do people transact with us? And I'll get into details for these. And the third pillar is the MITDP process and reforming how we look at oversight so that we can drive better outcomes with the money that we are investing in these large projects. So if we could go to the next slide. So in support of these different initiatives, we're making some changes and adding some key talent to the organization. The far left column, I think, is names that you may or may not recognize, but is somewhat unchanged. The 4 boxes to the right are largely new. So to build out our focus on accessibility, we have 2 open roles under Andrew Drummond, our Director of Accessibility. We are hiring a Director of User Experience, a Director of a Product, and a Director of Engineering. And those roles really bring kind of this integrated, collaborative way of working to help us start with people and make this shift from thinking about technology as projects to thinking about technology as products. And it's a really critical distinction. Projects are typically managed from a budget and timeline perspective. Have we done all the things we said we would do in the time and in the amount of money that we said at the very beginning we needed? Product management is really aligning to what problem are we trying to solve? Are we approaching it the right way? What is the smallest thing that we can do to start proving the case and learning and adding value? And how much further do we need to go? So it is a much more dynamic and agile, intentionally agile process, and bringing that perspective into the state where we don't currently have product managers, we don't currently have any engineers, can help us better use our contracts and our contractor resources so that we are not relying on them for technical direction, which leads to some of these gold-plated solutions. All right, so I think a lot about customer journeys, and at a really high level, customers engage with the government in kind of this sequence of steps. And some of these steps may have sub-steps, and some people may just engage in pieces of it. But at a high level, people are coming to the government to learn about something, apply for something, and then potentially track and manage that benefit or application. So when we think about the starting point of that journey, learning, that starts with websites. That starts with all the information that we put out. And when you look at the slide, there's the front stage, which is the people outside of the government who are coming to us, our residents, our businesses, and the backstage is our agency staff who are supporting call centers and escalations and processing these forms and applications that come in. So we really need to look holistically at both the end-to-end journey, what happened before and what's happening after, and did somebody get a letter that's confusing, or can we fix this language on the website, and how are we doing this in a consistent way? But a lot of that great data and information comes from our state staff who are working with our customers to understand, what are people calling about? What are people escalating to constituent services about? Where are people getting stuck or confused or lost, so that we can improve those points of friction in those areas that don't make sense? So if you go to the next slide. So I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of websites. We have I think 800 plus I've found so far. And there are some that I think are kind of outside of the realm of what I would focus on, but there are a lot that represent our executive agencies. And we are really kind of manifesting our org chart. Every agency has their own website or multiple websites. We're taking that and building our org chart kind of into technology. And we're doing it in a way that is very much about us. This is my agency, and this is what I want to tell you or what I want you to know. the shift is to understand who's coming to your website. What do they want to know? How do we talk in their language? How do we remove barriers? The people in government who are writing content for websites are experts in their content. When I've worked in the past with unemployment offices, they are writing content that assumes a level of knowledge that most of the people applying for unemployment benefits do not have. And that leads them down a path of getting confused, answering things the wrong way, winding up in months-long backlog. So if we can be more clear and more user-centered upfront, we mitigate a lot of very costly downstream implications. So if we go to the next slide, we currently have a web team and we currently provide web services. Those web services right now are very basic. We do domain name registration, we do hosting of websites in our SharePoint environment on AWS, and we build out kind of shells of basic sites. But we don't work with an agency to say, how do we make your site good? How do we make your site help you deliver on your mission? How do we help you understand who's coming and what are they coming to do? So that is the new offering that these new roles will help us start to build out in terms of discovery, which is looking at your data, looking at your call center, looking at what gets escalated, and talking to end users to understand what's confusing. What are you coming to do? What are your top tasks on this site? And then using that to inform the design of the site. And design is everything from, I think, what people traditionally hear. They think the color, the fonts, the pictures, but design is also the layout, and it's the navigation, and it's the language. Is this going to make sense to people if we call it this? Are we writing this in language that people can understand and read and make sense of without needing to get help? So those are services that we are adding both through internal staff, but also through some procurements so that we can bring in that type of expertise to better support agencies. So the next stage in the journey is all around how do we transact? How do we help people engage? And right now, a lot of that is forms. Most of government is I'm filling out a form to get a thing. Either it's a permit or a license or a benefit. Some of those forms may be really easy, simple forms that we could do potentially in a fillable PDF, although that's not ideal and still creates burden on our users to have to fill something out and potentially print it and then still mail it in. And then we have to transcribe printed information into data. Some of those forms are really very robust, and we don't have a consistent or great way to do that right now. We have a number of different options, and we're exploring really what is the right way to think about all these different platforms between the one-stop platform and the eGov platform, and then some of our custom developed platforms like MD Think. For a customer, they don't care what the back end is, and they shouldn't have to find something on the website and then find something somewhere else to actually get the benefit or the service. So we are trying to think holistically about what is the user journey from, I want to know about a thing, I want to know about paid family leave, and I want to apply for paid family leave, all in one place, not having to go to multiple places. On the back end, there may be multiple places, but to the degree that we can make that seamless and invisible, we are removing burden for our end users, for our customers, and we are ideally making it easier for the state to maintain a more simple architecture of all of these platforms. And I think that might be all I have. That's all I have.
And we'll do questions at the end. So whoever is next, I know AI is next. That will be great.
I know we should have put this last because this is everyone's, keeps everyone on the hook, but we'll turn over to Nishant for a brief update on AI and specifically how we're operationalizing it with the advent of the AI EO last week.
Thank you. Nice to see you in person.
It's great to see you as well.
After seeing you on Zoom.
Yes. Well, thank you, Secretary Savage, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to brief you on how Do It is thinking about AI. Can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
Should I bring this closer to me? Okay. So I'll cover a few different areas. One, what is AI? What's the context that we're operating in? Two, what are some of the inherent risks in leveraging AI? Three, we'll speak a bit more to Governor Moore's recent AI executive order. And four, I'll end by discussing immediate next steps that we're thinking through as we prepare to execute on the EO. Next slide. Actually, this slide. So the definition of AI tends to be a sort of eye of the beholder thing, rather than some sort of established consensus. There's lots of definitions. Some are philosophical, some are technical, and those will continue to change over time as the technology and its capabilities change. And so for purposes of this presentation, I propose that we use something very high level, machines and software that mimic human intelligence to make predictions and perform tasks based on collected data. And then, and this is key, that get better at doing so over time. I'll note that there is a more sort of involved specific description and definition in our recent executive order that we took entirely from the White House AIEO, and I think that one is quite good. So, in terms of the history, AI has been around in different forms since the late 1950s or so, often in academic research and in industry labs. And in time, it got siloed into different disciplines. So computer vision, natural language processing, robotics, expert systems, a number of others. And in the last 15 years, there's been a renaissance of sorts, based on exploding data availability and cheaper computational power. And so in consumer technology, that's been the force behind a lot of very sort of visible features, which might help to illustrate how it works. So for example, when you go to an e-commerce site or streaming services, you often see a "you might also like" or "recommended for you" category. And those are based on algorithms, or algorithms are basically just sets of rules that were trained on massive data sets and that taught a computer program to do specific tasks, and in particular to recommend, to classify, to label, or to predict things. And those algorithms can be fed with data like your purchase history, items that you viewed, products you've rated, things that folks with demographic and socioeconomic profiles like yours have tended to purchase, and they spit out what in the catalog might be something that you'd like. Or you're shown, this is sort of another example, you're shown ads from search engines or social media platforms. And those companies take the plethora of data that essentially been created when you use their services, that's created when you interact with others in your social graph and as you browse the web, and they serve up ads to the right folks at the right time in the midst of your buying journey that fit personas like the one that your data implies. Sometimes these can be so good that it feels like the device is listening, when in fact, it's really clever machine learning based on granular insights from just these astronomically sized data sets. But, and I think this is the key, that lots of people use these tools without knowing that they're powered by AI. And so the true liftoff in public consciousness was just really in the last 2 years with the advent of generative AI, which is powered by something that we call foundation models and large language models, and the most famous of which was OpenAI's ChatGPT, or GPT-4. And that made it very easy to create text, sound, images, video, entire 3D environments by essentially anyone. And that generative capability is what ended up having massive ramifications as well, huge potential and huge risks. And now we're in the midst of what will likely be breakthroughs, years of breakthroughs really, on speed, computational efficiency, predictive and reasoning capacities, alignment to model creators' intent, and something that we call embodied AI. And that'll lead to AI agents in the coming years, which will make today's look honestly ancient by comparison. And so, hopefully that yields things like novel approaches for materials discovery, or digital twins of Earth systems for better monitoring of the climate, to hyper-personalized tutors, to optimizing experiment design in synthetic biology. Next slide. So that's the really high level context, but as everyone in this room I know is painfully aware, technology is a double-edged sword, and so I think it's worth running through a number of the risks here. So the point of this slide is really to say that the risks of AI without guardrails are real today, and they're often different from traditional software, and so they need to be managed in unique ways. And I'll sort of speed through some of these, but I'm happy to double click on anything in Q&A or separately offline. One common one here is algorithmic bias and discrimination. And many AI models are trained on the public internet. That means they can capture and reflect the common biases that are present there. So, if an AI system is making a decision on something, and all things being equal, person A is treated differently from person B, and particularly if that's on the basis of some legally protected characteristic, that can lead to discriminatory outputs, and, with the obvious sort of moral and legal consequences therein. Issues around privacy and cybersecurity often tend to go hand in hand. And some of these are more obvious. For example, folks can mistakenly hand over personally identifiable information, or what we call PII, in engaging with chatbots. Generative AI and deepfakes can enable more convincing phishing attacks and social engineering. And others are more emergent and won't be an issue until one day they are. So, for example, there was a study recently that showed it's possible to figure out what someone on the other end of a Zoom call is typing by applying a machine learning algorithm to the audio. On the misinformation, disinformation, deepfakes front, I imagine everyone in this room is pretty well acquainted with that. The ease and scale of producing this content will keep getting easier over time. And that's mostly because of the generative AI tools that are available, but also given the availability of increasingly strong open source models. And tactics like watermarking and disclosures and other techniques, are sort of the tip of the spear in combating this. But the worry is that it'll be an arms race as ways around those tactics are found in time. There's also something called model drift, which I wanted to mention, where AI models that were once useful can perform poorly once the relationship between the variables in the real world change, or that the training data becomes outdated. And that's a significant problem if the model is being used to process insurance claims, for example, or choosing what neighborhoods to redeploy officers. I'll also point out that there's increasingly a number of ethical gray areas here. This is one of those buckets that encompasses new behaviors that society hasn't yet defined as good or bad. And so a good example, I think, from a few months ago, excuse me, is the news that Mayor Eric Adams of New York City robocalled thousands of constituents speaking in fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, and a number of other languages, of course, leveraging AI tools. And was it misleading that he convinced folks that he speaks those languages? Or was it simply a great way to communicate with constituents? And the final point I'll make on this slide is that AI capabilities are rapidly changing. We tend to overestimate what changes in a year, and we tend to underestimate what changes in 5 years. And the implication there is that new types of harms will continue to surface. So this list will continue to grow. And in response, we need to adopt governance frameworks that are flexible and that can evolve as the technology does. Next slide. So I think that naturally brings us to what we're doing about this, and Governor Moore's recent executive order on AI. And this EO was designed to build momentum and cohere synced action across state agencies to leverage AI responsibly and to leverage AI productively by state government. I think a lot of folks in this room probably have read through it already, but for those that haven't, let me just give a quick recap. This EO does 6 major things. One, it establishes the principles that internal use of AI should abide by. And that's really key to being specific in exactly what we're trying to govern in the first place. These are fairness and equity, innovation, privacy, safety, security, and resiliency, validity and reliability, and transparency, accountability, and explainability. These sound very high level and sort of fuzzy, but in the literature, they mean sort of very specific things. 2, this establishes a governing body that's responsible for executing the executive order and for advising the governor on AI. And that ensures that we have a body that makes high-level decisions, that has the power to spin up working teams, and is accountable for moving forward its directives. The third thing that the EO does is it mandates creating and operationalizing a clear AI governance framework. And that includes both short-term stopgap efforts, as well as more medium-term action plan. Fourth, it mandates us to find ways to upskill the state workforce and getting short-term talent. This is necessary really to ensure that the state has the folks it actually needs, that for all these projects that will require deep expertise, as well as upskilling workers in the state to use AI effectively and responsibly. Fifth, it asks for deep dives and recommendations in really 3 key domains: economic development, workforce, and security. And that ensures that we're doing the horizon scanning that's necessary for Maryland's specific context with regards to AI's impact in each of these areas. And finally, it asks for experimentation in the form of proofs of concept and pilots. And that puts us on the path to what I call building our AI muscle and ensuring the technology's benefits can be harnessed by Marylanders. So in terms of next steps, we're in the midst of building out an execution plan. to get greater clarity on timelines, budget, working teams, et cetera, to operationalize the EO. And we wanted to share with this committee, at a high level, how we're thinking about some of these immediate next steps. The EO just came out last week, so I'll note that for almost all of these things, we're still figuring out our approach. It's very much building the proverbial plane while flying it. So I'll frame this more as the questions that we're thinking through at the moment. So, the first is really building out our internal and external partnerships and working infrastructure. So one of the most important elements in setting this EO up for success is spending the cycles up front to ensure that we have the right structure, the right governing body, the right tools, expertise, and working rhythms in place. And that means setting up teams that can operate across organization and agency boundaries with clear direction and decision-making, with access to experts and representative voices that can help guide them. For the sub-cabinet, the first meeting will be in a few weeks from now. We're thinking through the exact types of decisions that we'll make at each meeting and what its initial priorities are from the executive order. And in parallel, we need to identify the right working teams for each initiative that's implied by the EO and an AI lead for each agency. Over the longer term, the question that we need to answer is, given our particular context, what types of roles and organizational structures make sense to facilitate strong AI governance and use? Who do we need in-house? And what structures can play dual roles or be repurposed? The answer, at least in part, we believe, will go hand in hand with the establishment of the Maryland Digital Service, as well as the evolution of the governance, risk management, and compliance function within DoIT. On the external partnerships and engagement side, we know that we'll have to rely on experts and stakeholder voices in academia, in industry, in civil society, and labor to make all of this work. One element of the EO, for example, is going deep into those domains of economic development, workforce, and security. And to move those forward, we'll need to bring together the right combination of external experts and internal subject matter experts. And fortunately, we're blessed to have amazing institutions in state here, like Johns Hopkins, who I believe is sort of in the house. And we've kicked off initial conversations, around partnerships with a range of institutions. The second major sort of bullet point here is, is fleshing out and operationalizing each of the AI principles that we've noted on the EO. This will end up being a really big percentage of the work, essentially the work to make the principles that we've identified real. We'll have to understand for each principle, what does it mean for it to be fully adhered to? Fairness and equity, for example, is sort of one of those top of the line ones where what set of 10 things, if we have a check mark against those, means that that principle is met for any AI system in use in the state. Then we'll have to implement a set of AI governance practices to meet those bars. We'll have to figure out what the right set of things there is, but it's likely to be some combination of risk assessments during a project intake processes, procurement standards that are reflected in contract language, and some form of continuous monitoring. And we're also thinking through how to do this as a short term as stopgaps and more fully in the medium term. The other key priority here, and one thing that we need to sort of power almost any of our efforts, is a better understanding of current AI use across the state and a canonical way to tell what AI is in use where at any given time. So, we expect requests and uses for AI tools to significantly increase this year, and we know that the current use is pretty low. That includes things like license plate readers, facial recognition for mobile driver's license requests, and a variety of process automation efforts. There's also what we call shadow IT, the use of publicly available software without our knowledge, and sometimes on personal devices. And our guess is this is quite pervasive with tools like ChatGPT and DALL-E. We think the immediate step here is actually pretty clear. We'll need to stand up an inventory of all the AI use cases in the state at any given time. And the good news is that the EO will help us drive some synced action here via the sub-cabinet. So our first focus will be to get that in place and hopefully use existing and ongoing inventories that we are already doing in the state as the basis for these. And the last, or I'll say moving on, is sort of another pressing need is to issue guidance to Maryland agencies on leveraging generative AI tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, DALL-E, and many others that are popping up. We know these are likely in use by staff, and now that we've adopted a set of principles, we need to provide the best practices in these tools. We need to provide what uses are banned now and guidance on disclosures in specific circumstances, like X document was generated, edited, translated with ChatGPT on Y date. And this is something, CIOs across agencies have been asking for, and it's important because it'll allow us to unlock experimenting with these tools more widely. And finally, and I think most excitingly, we're thinking through how best to identify potential use cases and move forward experiments, proofs of concept, and pilots. We know that there's going to be some set of repeatable use case types that we absolutely want to experiment with. Things like translations for websites, trying chatbots to make services more accessible, leveraging generative AI for low-risk processes that are universally hated. We'll be spending more time identifying these opportunities and fleshing them out in more detail, and Marcy and I will be working closely on that set of efforts as well. We know there will be specific asks by agencies, and we want to help those agencies find ways to structure their work as experiments. So we ensure that we're learning from the results so that when one agency tries it out, we can see that this is repeatable and tell another agency that, looks, this works, so you guys should be trying it out as well. So the hard part, of course, will be doing this while creating governance standards at the same time, as well as procurement processes that make things a little bit tougher for quick experimentation. But we're quite excited to move it forward. So I'll end there. Note that this is not a comprehensive list of elements, but a high-level schematic. Happy to take questions afterwards or offline.
All right, who is next?
Okay, so well, that's a great transition to Lance Cleghorn, who's the Director of State Cybersecurity. And, as Marcy takes on the work of improving our web experience and standing up a digital service team to build more products, and as we work closely with Nishant on experimenting and standing up real AI use cases, we need to make sure that we're doing so in a secure manner. In addition to that, there's the core work of ensuring that we're providing executive agencies with centralized cyber managed services. So I'm thrilled to have Lance on the team. He came over with me from the Department of Defense. So we're in very good hands. And I'll turn it over to you, Lance, to talk a little bit about what we've done this past year and some of the upcoming plans.
And welcome. And when you're done, we're going to allow a few minutes for questions from the members. Okay, thank you.
Sounds great. And I just want to make sure everybody can hear me really well.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Secretary Savage. Thank you to the committee and to you, Madam Chairperson, for allowing us to come here and speak today. As the Secretary mentioned, I am the Director for State Cybersecurity. I work for the Secretary as well as for the acting State Chief Information Security Officer, Greg Rogers, who planned his vacation fantastically well to be in Florida while we have the snow this week. And as the Director for State Cybersecurity, I primarily focused on the engineering and implementation of centralized cybersecurity services, as well as assisting our state executive agencies with detecting and remediating cyber threats as soon as possible and minimizing the deleterious effects of threats and incidents when they occur. So if you'll indulge me, I'd love to talk a little bit about the work that we did within the office in 2023, talk a bit about our centralized cybersecurity services strategy, dig into some of our goals for 2024, and then wrap up with our information security officer program, which is something that I'm personally very excited about and I think will be a catalyst to achieving our goals here in 2024.
And just for our time is 1:42. And I know we have an hour for you and an hour, I believe, for the next panel. So just if you could keep that in mind, and we would like to ask some questions.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be very quick.
Thank you.
Awesome. And so starting with 2023, there was 4 major key areas that we focused on, starting with our cybersecurity centralization strategy, which we published in August of last year, that really drives the idea of how do we go about centralizing cybersecurity services for our state executive agencies in such a way that's also extensible to our local government partners. We're also looking at security standards. So Nishant mentioned governance, risk management, and compliance. That was something that we realized in 2023 is an area that we could be a force multiplier by defining key policies, strategies, and standards that state executive agencies could adopt. We also looked at OSM staffing, so the Office of Security Management. One of the key areas that we looked at is, you got to fund cyber and you got to make sure that cyber is well staffed. And that starts with OSM if we're going to look at doing centralized services. So we did a lot of hiring and centralizing of staffing within 2023. And then we also looked at incident reporting. Ever since the state had its significant ransomware incident a few years back, the state has invested a lot of time, effort, and processes into improving incident response and incident reporting so that we know when incidents occur and we know how to remediate them quicker. And building on that, I'd like to highlight a couple of things that we did in 2023. Our cyber emergency response team responded to what we categorize as 6 major cybersecurity incidents. And 3 of those incidents we were able to actually publicly disclose, which is a first for the process that was defined in 2022, which gives the State Chief Information Security Officer and the Secretary of DO IT the ability to disclose incident details that may be relevant to the Maryland public or the general offices within the state. And so we're really excited to see that 3 of those incidents were able to be disclosed. There's a link here in the slide if you'd like to go and look. Spoiler is that they were all related to Move It, which is a vulnerability that occurred at the end of last year, and all 3 were related to third-party contractors that the state used to process data. We also, within 2023, established the Directorate of Cyber Resilience, which partners together some of our proactive services of discovering vulnerabilities through penetration testing, vulnerability discovery through adversary emulation and threat hunting, some of our just-in-time services with the Maryland Security Operations Center, and then some of our reactive services with the Maryland CERT and incident response. And then, Marcy mentioned this concept of like a North Star. I think SB 812 has kind of been the North Star for us. And so we'd love to hit on a couple of the things that we've completed in that year, which is that, we hired a director of state cybersecurity. That's me. A director of local cybersecurity, which is Ms. Netta Squires, who's helping us build towards this idea of a whole of state approach to cybersecurity. And we're also looking at implementing our statewide cybersecurity strategy, which we can bounce to the next slide and I'll talk about. So our statewide cybersecurity centralization strategy, it's kind of a mouthful, but essentially what our goals are here is to provide consistent centralized services to all the state agencies. So I'll pick on Department of Transportation, Department of Corrections, and Department of Health. All 3 of these organizations have different mission requirements. They have different data that they process, and all of that needs to be handled in different ways with nuances. But all of these organizations need some of the same core central services like endpoint detection and response, vulnerability management and discovery. And so our statewide strategy aims to try and provide that base service to these organizations and give them the flexibility to grow the service within their specific organization to meet their mission needs and nuances. We also have a goal with the strategy to make it extensible to local government units so that we really achieve that whole of state approach. Across the United States, we've realized that there's no point in securing state executive agencies if we don't go about securing local government agencies. And that stems from the fact that these governmental units are inherently intertwined. So if you think about K-12 schooling being intertwined with the Department of Education, local hospitals and clinics being intertwined with our Department of Health. All of these things lead us to understanding that we have to secure local government to be able to secure state government. And nowhere is that more true than Maryland, where we have the unique infrastructure of sharing a common networking platform of Network Maryland. Some of the key strategy areas, I'll just breeze through very quickly, centralizing our log collection and monitoring. So giving us the visibility into what is going on at each of these agencies from a cyber threat perspective, defining metrics and reporting so that we can, in a very succinct and digestible format, provide details to the secretary on service adoption and service implementation and some of our key performance indicators that she can then share with other executive state agency stakeholders and ultimately with the legislature yourselves. We're also looking at continuing to build on incident response. We know it's a key priority. How do we continue to build on it and make it successful? Augmenting our IT and cyber staff. Again, 2 things we have to do for cyber is fund it and then make sure it's staffed appropriately. And then increasing our cyber service offerings, which is something that I'm particularly passionate about in this role, because I don't want to see us, the secretary alluded to the fact that we've done centralization in the past and we've kind of gone back and forth. And I think one of the big holdups that led to that is that we in the past have maybe dictated from an ivory tower from Do It, here's the services you're going to need and here's what they'll look like. And I think increasing our cyber service offering has to come with the mission nuance of each of these executive agencies and understanding their specific mission needs. Next slide. So what does this look like in 2024? What objectives and key results or OKRs are we aiming towards? We want to see our existing services that we feel like are in a mature state continue to be adopted. So that's our managed endpoint detection and response through CrowdStrike, vulnerability discovery through Tenable, security awareness training, our Security Operations Center, and our Information Sharing and Analysis Center are all services that we want to see continue to be adopted in the greatest number possible across the state. But we want to do that intelligently. We don't just want to go in and kind of do that centralization of rip and replace with something like CrowdStrike, for example. We want to make sure that it's done at a time where the agency can test and ensure that it's going to meet their mission needs, but also that it's done with respect to taxpayer dollars that have already been spent on solutions. We want to reduce redundant services, but we also want to make sure that the services that have already been paid for are received by the state. We're working on building partnerships, and Nishant talked about the executive order that started at the beginning of last week. There was also an executive order on the Maryland National Guard Partnership for Cyber. We're looking at extending that to state colleges and universities in 2024, and hopefully providing a cyber assessment capability along with vulnerability discovery and ultimately remediation. And that's where we feel like specifically as a force multiplier, the Guard and colleges and universities can give us that kind of third-party view. Sometimes remediation is very clear cut and sometimes it's very nuanced. And we feel like that third party analysis will help us achieve the best results. Governance, risk management, and compliance. Within the last 2 weeks, we've hired our director of GRC. They're working on building out analysts and teams to support these assessments, and then starting to build on that 2023 objective of centralizing policy as we begin to deploy that here in 2024. And then lastly, our information security officer program, which I think kind of ties it all together. We're in the process of hiring a program manager and finalizing the requirements to provide this engineering capability across the state executive agencies. I'll dig into that in my last slide. So our State Information Security Officer program, we call it the ISO program. What this looks like essentially is embedding cybersecurity engineering talent with each of our state executive agencies. We want to do that by grouping our state executive agencies probably by function, by size, or by mission, and then enabling these individuals to work with those specific agencies to determine what are their mission needs. How do we begin to centralize services in a way that meets those needs and doesn't cause any kind of blowback or issues with actual implementation. And we want these individuals to help implement the cybersecurity centralization strategy, but plan and schedule the adoption of those services in the most intelligent way possible. And at the end of the day, this gets us better incident response, faster detection of incidents, and faster recovery times when incidents occur. And our outcomes look like agency level cyber decisions and defense decisions begin to align with state strategies. So when something like transportation looks at implementing a new piece of IT infrastructure or a new solution or an AI capability, like Nishant mentioned, that we do that in a way that's extensible to all the rest of the state agencies that they can use for reciprocity, and that we save time, money, and effort while providing a better collective defense at a reduced cost. It just kind of makes sense. The state has better buying power than a state executive agency does individually. And at the end of the day, this all looks like optimized incident recovery and incident detection. And I think that's it for me. Hopefully that was fast enough.
That was pretty good.
Awesome. Awesome.
Very, very good. I
Awesome.
think you should teach a class on it.
Ah,
So we're gonna open it up for question, and Delegate Kaiser has the first question, followed by Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
My pleasure.
I wrote some notes down at the beginning of the presentation. My question, Madam Secretary and Ms. Jacobs, were kind of a combined thing. I don't think I can quite do what Delegate Hill did yesterday. What I heard you say, Madam Secretary, about the great, all the people you need to hire and the great team you have up with you. My general question is about the timing of the plan to hire all the people that you need. And similarly, Ms. Jacobs, I love the digital experience slide, and it's certainly that breakout of all the things. And I think you already know that that's a interest of mine for prior conversations, but I'm also curious there on the planning, timing, and staffing. And so in all the regards, the budget requests, the timing, planning, when is this going to happen? Is
Sure, I can
Big-
start, Marcy,
big
if
piece.
anyone would add. Sure. So we, a few different fronts, we've requested, so last year we received 20 pins for the cyber team. We just onboarded last week as well, our first ever employee engagement manager, and her role is really a liaison between us and DBM to keep the process moving at a clip. So we're really excited to work with her and try and find ways to, continue to expedite the process. And it's hard to find tech talent, so that's something that we'll be focused on. I think there's a couple of other, we've repurposed some pins for Marcy's team, and we've posted for those positions. So we're hoping to get started with a couple of those positions now, and then, perhaps, additional years we'll add more staff. If there's anything you wanted to add.
No, I hear what you're saying about it's hard to hire technical talent, but I've got a ton of interest, which is wonderful. I'm now in the wonderful position of going through 120 resumes. So there's a lot of product and design talent that live in the state, that are excited to help the state, that are excited about building out this team. Your question about when do we start? We are not waiting until we have some magical number of people to get started. We are going to start on what we can start on in small ways with the talent that we have, and we're going to leverage contractors. And hopefully over time that balance will shift a little bit, and we do more in-house, and we only use contractors for things that are truly larger efforts, but we are starting. We are also working with the U.S. Digital Response. They offer pro bono support. They are a volunteer organization. We have a partnership with them to work on the first website, which will be for the Maryland Veterans Affairs. And that is starting probably in February. So we are starting.
You have a follow-up?
my only follow-up is I looked at the flow chart you all provided of your organization. and it matched mostly what was on the Maryland manual, but didn't match what was on your own website. And so that is a challenge
Exactly.
that I have with all agencies, and if however that could be prioritized for all of us and for all the constituents, just to find the right person to call is the biggest challenge.
I 100% agree with you. We need to eat our own dog food with our own website. It is something that I am very focused on and will be the top priority for the team when they come in. We have kind of some partial designs, but in the true spirit of user-centered design, our website serves other agencies and we need to test and validate what we are putting together. We are currently, Secretary Savage has put together a roadshow where we are talking with agencies and going and visiting them and hearing their concerns and questions and challenges. And that is helping to inform what are the things that we should be answering on our site? What are the things that people look to us to help them do? Whether it's procurement or talent or understanding the services that we offer. So we are using that to inform where we're going.
Great questions. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing the presentation today. This is a lot of information. My question is a cybersecurity question. You talked about strengthening the state through some of our local partners. Do we have a strategy that includes the vendors that the state uses? I understand our Department of Health attack was through a vendor. So do we have a strategy that addresses that?
The best person that can answer this question, please.
Yes, sir. I think that's a fantastic question. And I think it stems out of our governance, risk management and compliance directorate, where they'll begin to define actually like, how do we track, software bill of materials? How do we understand what vendors are actually providing to the state? And then how do we go about understanding when a vendor has an incident or has a cybersecurity impact? How does that get reported to the state in such a way that we can understand the impacts and we can begin to work to make notifications or make resolution as it affects the actual Maryland infrastructure or Maryland data? Yes, sir.
My pleasure. I have next Delegate Bagnall, followed by Collison, followed by Taveras, followed by Hill. And it is now 1:56. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, thank you for your presentation and for being so user-centered and trying to better adhere to the 3-click rule, which is a real bone of contention of mine. I too am a huge fan of this flow chart, and I have one ask that we could duplicate this and add a category to Delegate Kaiser's point that identifies who we contact and who we liaison with if we have a concern about legislation, a concern about a constituent concern, something where we can so that we can streamline even our process getting connected with the right expertise. And if we could share that out with the entire General Assembly, that would be amazing. Thank you.
You all are our users too. So absolutely.
All right. When can we expect that?
As soon as I can make a hiring decision.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. I have next Delegate Collison.
Thank you also for the presentation. And I'm wondering if you're going to be, this isn't my question, but hopefully you're going to be offering a sort of AI for dummies kinds of tutorial for folks like me who need to understand it better. But in terms of healthcare, can you, like, in just one sentence or two sentences, how would you see practically AI supporting healthcare services in the state?
I think probably the Johns Hopkins experts.
Yeah,
that
we
are
have that on the
probably
next
the
panel.
best to answer that.
Yes, thank you. That was an easy one. Delegate Taveras, let's see if you can follow that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I saw the keynote speaker of Abraham Maldonado, who is an AI expert, and he was at one of our national conferences with the chair over, I believe, in Philadelphia, and he built a ChatGPT model to respond to 311. And I thought, why can't we implement something similar where we can help guide individuals? And I think that will be like a circumvent more easier way to address some of the concerns rather than the 3-click rule. Thank you.
It's a great question. We took three of us actually took a field trip to Montgomery County a couple of months ago. They are working with Microsoft and another company to build that out. So it's a really interesting pilot, and we've been working closely with them to think if there's something we can do to kind of extrapolate that to the state. Because I agree with you. I think it's one of the some highest potential use cases. You know, it's also functioned as a website audit because it culls material from across all the state's websites too. So it actually also helps us with that problem too of, you know, where is it pulling information from? But it also gets into some of the interesting issues around translation services. That's a function as well. So we're working closely with them to see if there's something that we can do.
Sure. I mean, I could provide you his information so you could see what products you
Sure.
provide for New York City.
Sure.
And he's somebody that he's maybe 1 or 2 hours away from here. I'm just
No,
making the connection.
We would love that. We're definitely starting to do some more field trips. So we'd love that.
Hot, what he
Yeah.
produced.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That'd be
he
great.
was very impressive.
That'd be great.
Thank you. I have next Delegate Hill, followed by Woods.
Very much, Madam Chair, and thank you all. Thank you, Madam Secretary. So comment and the question. The comment is that as we're waiting to hire these people, some of the websites we're using are worse than they were even a year ago. And the administration's been here, and it's embarrassing and it's problematic, but we have 24/7 tech people who are responding, but they don't seem to have a way to get their complaints that they're dealing with over to the people to fix it, or else the people are collecting the complaints but not fixing it. So that's the comment. The question is to Mr. Cleghorn. Really important, the centralization of the cyber, but talk to us a little bit about what that means for the vulnerability. So if it's all centralized, doesn't that put us at greater risk?
It's a fantastic question. And so homogeneity in cybersecurity is one of the things that's been looked at now for many years across defense in depth, and as that's evolved into zero trust. And not to throw a bunch of buzzwords at you, but I think one of the things that's kind of proven out is that the more centralization you have, the better able you are to actually understand what you have. Nishant made the point about shadow IT, and that's something that we see across the industry very significantly. And centralization helps shine a light on that shadow IT and minimize it. And it really, while it may seem counterintuitive to some degree, it gives us a better chance to track and understand our vulnerabilities and remediate them more quickly than a heterogeneous environment might.
Too or not?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. N+1 redundancy is an industry standard, and it's something that the state is going to continue to strive for. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have Delegate Woods.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Shaw. You talked about the renaissance, if you will, of AI since the 1950s and how it is expanding and becoming better. Two things. You talked about the algorithmic bias and discrimination. I unfortunately saw something one of my colleagues showed me yesterday of an AI description. You put yourself in a computer and they break you down by race. I was extremely concerned that the African American was presented in a very negative way, and it kind of literally blew my mind because it was literally a sexual. I mean, it was horrendous. So that's the first question with regard to the algorithmic bias and discrimination, and then the second thing was regarding to ethical gray areas. Because I'm hearing the chatter. What are we doing to make sure that we have allowed ourselves to have enough control where AI does not take over human intervention?
If I had the answers to those questions, I would be writing a lot of legislation. Starting on the bias and discrimination side, absolutely a massive issue, and it's why we've enshrined it as one of the principles that we've adopted as part of the AI executive order. The next set of steps will be looking at that principle and saying, okay, when we procure a set of services from a vendor, how do we ensure that we can detect when instances of bias and discrimination pop up, and defining what that means in the first place? That might be quantitative metrics, it might be qualitative, it might be audits that we do every so often, it might be some form of continuous monitoring. Either way, there's a whole bunch of research being done right now as to how to do that set of detection. And so this is another reason why we need to be in sort of tight working relationship with academics and with industry who are doing a lot of that set of work, and then ensure that we can adopt those practices for ourselves. Computer vision, which you mentioned, the sort of computer taking a look at that is a sort of big issue everywhere, and something that's sort of top of mind for a lot of practitioners in the space. On sort of ethical gray areas, there are a million of them, and it's I think the sort of underlying a lot of that set of questions is how do we always see what's coming around the corner, kind of like how do we know what's coming down the pike? Because something is not a problem until it is, and once it is, it could have massive ramifications. One of the things that the EO does is specifies 3 areas that we want to at least start that set of horizon scanning around. It also allows us to add additional areas should we see that it's important and necessary. And so, the chair of the subcabinet has the power to do that. And I think that'll be part of the sets of conversations the subcabinet has to say that, okay, beyond those 3 areas, are there others that we should be looking at more deeply, and getting sort of the most expert voices across the state together and offering a set of recommendations to say, here's what the state should be doing about that.
I don't see any other questions, but just, Delegate Martinez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess this will be the last question, fingers crossed. But what are the plans for reskilling, upskilling government workers with integration of AI technologies? I know it was kind of touched on a little bit, but I wasn't sure if we had some concrete measures that we're implementing right now through state government.
Nothing as yet, but it is something that we want to do, and that the EO actually calls for as well, in terms of upskilling state workers for use on generative AI in particular. But generative AI is not the only type of AI. There's also other types of AI. There's some amazing trainings and organizations that actually provide these for state staff and for federal staff specifically. And so we started conversations with those folks to see, okay, is that a potential set of modules and mechanisms that we can leverage? There's also already existing trainings that, on sort of the cyber side of things. And so the idea is to integrate the set of AI services with that cyber one. And so it's one sort of streamlined way of accessing and understanding information.
And this is actually, I don't see any other questions, but just for the committee, this is a long journey because this is changing constantly. The executive order set some initial guardrails for all the agencies, but we are going to have an opportunity to consider some other bills that get more into the guidance and the biases and the data. And I know that I want to take a minute to thank Delegate Kaiser and Delegate Hill from this committee, Delegate Young from Baltimore City, I believe Delegate Kerr, and also Senator Hester, that have been working on these issues. And so the Government Operations Subcommittee will be having quite a few bills. And one of them in particular, the one that Senator Hester and Delegate Lewis are working on, I have encouraged them to work with you so that we can make sure that whatever we pass complements what you're doing, that it does not replicate what you're doing, but enhances it to look at what Delegate Wood said, some of the biases and how to address that, right? So this is a long journey, which is why, you have created a structure for it. And I think that the legislature will enhance that as well. So it is something that needs to be done, right? It is great, but it can also be abused, and we have the subject matter in this committee. So I want to thank everyone that has worked on it. I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and for your very impressive staff. Thank you for presenting so beautifully and clear, and knowing that this is just the beginning of our journey, okay? And I hope and I encourage you to work with our council, Ms. Rode, and the chair of the Operations Committee, Delegate Kerr, who will have those bills. I respectfully expect you to participate in the conversations and to sit down with the legislators and to try to find some consensus that work for all of us. And I'm only a phone call away. All right. Thank you so much for everything today. We really appreciate your time and your efforts. My pleasure. Next, we have John Hopkins, who will discuss the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare by Chair Collison. There you go. And for timekeeping, it is 2:09. And they will come up and we did tell them they had an hour. So, we have to honor that because we're running a little late. And there's three of them. Well, it depends on your questions, right? Which is okay. Actually, I think the presentations are great and the questions have been really impressive. So thank you very much. I don't discourage it. I think we all learn from it. There's three of them that are virtual. So we have Michael Hubbard. Is he virtual or in person? Are you I'm sorry, I just saw you. So if you can get us started. And he's the Director of Maryland Government Affairs, Government Community and Economic Partnership for Johns Hopkins University in Medicine. And then he will be followed by three individuals that are virtual. All from Johns Hopkins. Go ahead. Good afternoon.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name, as you say, is Michael Huber, Director of Maryland Government Affairs for Johns Hopkins University in Medicine. I want to thank you for the opportunity to bring a few faculty members before you to talk about this topic of AI in healthcare and how they intersect, and want to encourage members and individual members in the committee as you continue to wrestle with these topics to think of Johns Hopkins University as a resource. We have a number of faculty members who are expert in various components of this topic and are always happy to think through problems and answer questions that you may have.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll turn it over to our first Hopkins witness, Mark Dredze, who is a professor of computer science at the Malone Center at Johns Hopkins University.
And thank you very much for your expertise and for working with the committee on these issues. Is Mr. Dredze?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
How are you? Good afternoon.
Good. Thank you so much for having me, Madam Chair. It's really an honor to be here.
Well, we really are honored to have you and your expertise. So the whole committee's listening.
Okay, so let me first just introduce myself. I'm Mark Dredze. I'm the John C. Malone Professor of Computer Science at Johns Hopkins. I'm also on the board of directors of our brand new Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Institute. My background and training is in AI, focused on language data. What I just tell people now is if you've heard of ChatGPT, that's the sort of work I've been doing, but I've been doing that for 15, 20 years at this point. So before it was cool and popular. I've been working specifically in healthcare applications for about the past 15 years, and that's going to be the focus of what I talk about today, thinking about opportunities and challenges in applying AI methods to healthcare. So I want to just begin with a couple of observations. So first of all, stating the obvious, we are really witnessing a dramatic acceleration in the pace of innovation of artificial intelligence. I know a lot of people have heard of AI recently. This is a technology and field that's been around since the 1950s. There have been various waves of commercialization in the 70s and the 90s, again in the 2010s. But it's fair to say that what we are experiencing now is really quite different and unlike anything we've seen before, which is exactly why I'm speaking to you today. The current wave is really being driven by what we call generative AI, which is the ability of AI to create something new. And that's where you see ChatGPT. It creates new text, or technologies like DALL-E, which create new images. But AI is not monolithic. We use AI to help radiologists treat and diagnose complex tumors. We use AI to invest in the stock market. We use AI to assist drivers in avoiding traffic accidents. We might use AI to discover new materials for extreme environments. None of those are going to be in our ChatGPT. So even though ChatGPT gets a lot of attention, AI and all of the various uses of it are much, much more diverse than that. The other thing I want to point out is that healthcare has many of the characteristics that are particularly useful for AI flourishing. So AI is a very data-hungry technology. We need data, we need information. We have lots of data in healthcare. AI is a technology that helps automation. Healthcare is an area where there's lots of opportunities for automation. AI is a technology that can help with complex data-driven processes, and those are manifest in healthcare. So while I look at AI broadly speaking as being in this state of rising up and being so useful in many different areas, it's really clear that healthcare is going to be an area where there will be especially rich opportunities. So to understand some of the positive uses of AI in healthcare, I want to say two things that AI is really good at. So the first thing is autonomous AI, and this is AI that automates things, taking relatively simple decisions that we might need to make repeatedly, that might be really time consuming for people, and automating that. We have lots of those in healthcare. If you talk to doctors around medical documentation, there are many, many tasks that doctors have to do all the time that are very repetitious and that AI can really help automate. These are mostly self-contained decisions that just happen very, very frequently. And we can do a pretty good job in many of these cases of evaluating how well an algorithm is doing on these isolated tasks. The other area where AI is really good is what I would call assistive AI, which is AI helps us in making complex decisions, specifically complex decisions that pull together lots of different kinds of data. So people struggle in making decisions when there's a lot of information available. And actually machines are pretty good at synthesizing lots of information. So lots of decisions in healthcare require understanding the patient's history, the medications, tests, the latest clinical guidelines, latest case studies. And so AI is actually pretty good at pulling this information together and assisting people in making these types of decisions. So those are things that AI is good at. Those are two kinds of applications of AI. And the consequences are that if we do these kinds of applications correctly in healthcare, we can reduce costs because we will save doctors time. We will find issues sooner and maybe do better preventative care. We can improve outcomes by actually having better healthcare. People will have longer, healthier lives. And very importantly, there is an opportunity to improve equity. There is a lot of disparities in health inequities in our healthcare system. We have the ability to increase access to care for people by making it more accessible and affordable. We have the ability by automation to ensure a fairer process. And so there are opportunities where we can actually improve the equity of our healthcare system by applying AI correctly. So I think those are the ways in which I'm really encouraged. I want to put up a couple notes of caution where I am concerned. And I think we have to be aware of these concerns because very often we focus on the positives, and that's great. I'm a very optimistic, positive person. But before we rush forward, focused on the positives, we need to be aware of where the pitfalls might be, and then we're not creating problems in our applications of AI. So going back to the two types of applications I talked about, autonomous AI and assistive AI, there are problems that we need to be aware of in both of these cases. In autonomous AI, these are systems that are going to be making decisions based on existing data that we have and prior decisions that have been made. But we have to recognize that our healthcare system is flawed. And so any data we have from our healthcare system is going to itself be flawed. A system that simply mimics what doctors are already doing will be taking biases that doctors already have, but scaling them up in a way that could dramatically increase inequities in our healthcare system or lead to worse outcomes. The same thing is true of assistive AI, helping doctors make decisions. Doctors, of course, have biases. They're humans. That's natural. There are things we can do to help doctors overcome those biases. But automating decisions could automate those biases as well. We could only be giving information and presenting information to doctors that leads them to reinforce their biases. Something we need to be careful about is what's called automation bias. And this is something we've all experienced, which is there's a natural tendency to actually trust technology. And once you get a certain level of faith in the technology, even when it makes decisions that you might question, you assume that it's doing the right thing and you let it do its thing. And we just naturally, as people, often put too much faith in technology to solve our problems. And in this area of assistive AI, this could really make things worse. Worse might be worse outcomes. It might be higher costs in ways that are often harder to understand and identify. Okay, so what can we do to avoid some of these pitfalls while realizing some of the gains? And I'll leave you with a couple of suggestions to think about. The first is recognizing that incentives of the healthcare marketplace are often insufficient to get the kinds of results we want. We have seen this over and over in healthcare. We often need regulatory intervention to ensure that the incentives of the market align with what patients need, that improve equity, and then actually reduce costs. So I think to do this, we need to first think of where technology meets people. We cannot think of AI in isolation. We have to think of it as a technology being used by people. Think of when you go to buy a car, right? The most important factor for most people in buying a car is the test drive. What is it like to actually drive the car? It's not about what's under the hood. It's not even necessarily about gas mileage. What matters is the experience of driving a car. And you better believe that when they design cars, they're trying to optimize that experience to sell cars. We need to be thinking about AI as it's used by people in their experience, which means we really need to bring stakeholders to the table. That means people like us on this panel now who study this technology and people who develop the technology, but also the people who will be using it, doctors, nurses, people in the healthcare system, and the patients who are actually going to be affected by that technology. We have to understand who will be accountable for what happens here. Doctors love technology that makes their job easier. They don't like technology that increases their liability. We need to understand these issues. We can't just push technology out there to the market. The other thing we need to do is we need to focus on the context in which AI is used. If I'm evaluating, for example, self-driving car, I'm going to ask questions like, what is its safety record? How does it drive? I'm not going to necessarily care about how it processes an image of the road. What I care about is how it's actually used. Those details are complex, but we need to be thinking about the outcomes. The same thing is true of healthcare. If we're talking about AI in healthcare, how we regulate it and how we evaluate it, we can't just evaluate it as a technology. We have to evaluate it as part of a larger healthcare system, how the technology is actually being used, how it's actually affecting patients. And you might have the best piece of technology, the best medical device, but if it's not being used correctly, then it will lead to worse outcomes. Finally, we just need to keep these dialogues going. This is an area that is really changing rapidly. The technology itself is changing very, very, very quickly. And even for experts like my colleagues and I on the panel, it's really hard for us to predict what will happen a year from now. And so we really need to keep these conversations going. People who develop AI, people who use AI, like the doctors and the nurses, the policymakers who think about the regulations. We need to have these ongoing mechanisms to discuss things so that as new information surfaces and we have a better understanding of the impact of the technology, we can adapt accordingly. I want to thank you very much for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much. Next, Dr. O. Oh, that's a good idea. Our council's made an excellent suggestion to me. And Dr. Dretze, if you could stay on, and I will open up to questions to you so you can be on the screen now. So for each of the virtual visitors, we'll take the questions after their presentation. So are there questions for Dr. Dretze? Delegate Martinez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of getting to this, or you were kind of getting to this in your presentation. I want to thank you for presenting before the committee. But to what extent should AI be involved in critical clinical decisions? And I guess, how do we strike the balance between that AI assistance and human expertise?
Yeah, so I think so first of all, I think doctors and medical professionals must make healthcare decisions for a variety of reasons. It's not just about the quality of the technology. I think it speaks to us as a people of who do we want to empower with making really life-altering choices for other people? And I think that needs to be ultimately a job for people to decide. That said, these technologies can absolutely help that process. Just like doctors used to carry around notebooks with cheat sheets of things they needed to know, and now they have their phones with apps and they can look up information about different drugs and interactions. This is going to be another resource to help doctors make decisions. I think given that the different nature of this resource and its different role in the decision-making process, we need to evaluate how it affects the decision-making process. A lot of the evaluation of this technology is asking it questions and seeing how well it answers the questions. That's how we evaluate medical students. That's not necessarily what makes sense for AI, right? We don't test how well AI knows or a calculator knows how to do math by giving it math problems, right? Like we know what the capabilities of calculator are. We test calculators and elementary school students very differently. And so we need to be thinking about these technologies not as isolated technologies to evaluate, but actually giving these technologies to clinicians and measuring how it changes their decision-making. And I don't say just improves, I say changes, because there are going to be things that they do better and there are things that they will do worse. And we really need to understand that.
Good. Delegate White Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the for this presentation. When it comes to using this technology, I would like to know, how are we, if anything, preparing providers and clinicians now for this technology, and what could that essentially look like in the future, especially in how this technology could be used to assist providers and clinicians when it comes to decision making and even providing necessary care. So could you expound more about what are we doing to prepare providers now, but what also could that training and education look like for the future?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important question for medical education, and it's something we're really behind on. The challenge is not that we want to teach doctors in medical school how to use this technology, because by the time they're done with the residency, this technology will be outdated. And certainly in 20 years, this will be, ancient history. We really need to be thinking more broadly about what are the skills that doctors will need to deal with whatever that technology is. So skills might be collaborative decision-making with machines. We teach doctors how to make collaborative decisions because they work in teams. How do we teach them to make those kinds of decisions with machines? The machines that they will be using today, tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years will be different. But can we teach those core technologies? Much in the same way we teach empathy to doctors, right? The way doctors will interact with patients will change, the situations will change, what they have in those interactions will change, but we try and teach empathy as a skill so that will become a pervasive part of the doctor-patient relationship. So that's something that we haven't figured out yet, and I think medical schools absolutely do need to figure out what are the skills to teach doctors now that they're going to need. Similarly, are there things we need to stop teaching? If you think about elementary school math education, it changed as technology changed. And we don't teach anyone to use a slide rule anymore, right? Because we expect no one will need to use a slide rule. I know that's not elementary school. Are there things that we don't want to teach doctors anymore, things that we can phase out because we will assume they won't need to know them in the same way now? I think we're just at the very, very beginning of asking those questions, but we need to figure that out because we are training a generation of doctors that will absolutely be using these AI technologies.
Okay, good. Thank you. Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And I'm going to ask you to beg my indulgence, Mr. Gretzi, because this is a more of a, isn't that so, for the benefit of my Vice Chair? Because I just want to tell you that you mentioned something, which is devices, and I'm thinking medical devices. So I've worn a insulin pump for 20 odd years, been a type 1 diabetic for almost 40 now. And it is amazing to me and fascinating how impressive it is now. And about a year ago, I got a new software update, which I did over my own computer system. And what it's doing is it is reading my body every second of the day. So it's the only one the FDA now says is an artificial pancreas. So when you're a type 1 diabetic, your body changes all the time. It's not as simple as just, you know, taking insulin or whatever. So it is reading me all the time. It is reading every bit of my day because you're obviously burning carbs differently at night than you are in the morning, differently when I'm in session than I am at the gym. It is just fascinating to me that I don't even have to look at it anymore, and it keeps my blood sugar exactly where it's supposed to be. So I think that we are on the tip of the iceberg of what it can do with a lot of different medical devices, not just with doctors, but some of the things that they're using now for a myriad of different diseases that people are ailed with. And the more advanced we become with AI and some of the devices, the quicker that people can change their life and see real solutions, if not cures, but some of the things that help people deal with serious illnesses. Isn't that so?
No, I mean, I'll just say absolutely. If you've encountered devices, whether it's a CPAP machine or hearing aids or, you know, any of these things, like they're now web enabled, they connect to your phone. I mean, the technology is advancing tremendously. If you look at the first iPhone and the current iPhone and see how much is advanced, just imagine what's happening in these devices. And AI is going to play a role in all of that. Integrating information from all these devices to understand you and better fit you, to bring your doctor into this. It really is amazing what will be possible.
Thank you. The lights are beginning to go off, Delegate. I mean, the lights over my head. Delegate Woods.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I guess, really is a backbone of what Delegate Chisholm asked. In that we see these advances in AI, I'm wondering what do we see as the possibility that AI would actually begin to lead some of the care teams?
Yeah, so I think I'll say two things. One is I think it is important that humans remain in the decision-making seat. But there's so many situations and complexities of healthcare that I do think there are opportunities. So I'll give an example. When a candidate comes up for a transplant, they are reviewed by a committee of physicians who all review the case and then have a meeting. How that meeting is run, the order in which people speak, the information presented, all affects the decision of whether or not this patient is going to be eligible for an organ transplant. There is a lot of research studying just how those meetings are run, and that the fact is people run them in unintentionally biased ways. Is there an opportunity for AI assistants to run those meetings, not to make the decision of whether or not the patient gets the organ, but ensures that information is presented and people speak in the way that leads to the best outcomes and the least biased decisions? I don't know, but that is an area where AI might be leading in kind of a perception of maybe leading the meeting, even though the humans are making the final decisions. So healthcare is just an incredibly complex field. There are lots of these kinds of opportunities that may exist, and we're going to have to evaluate them.
Thank you. I think that is the last question for this panelist, and I really appreciate you being here today and your time and expertise. Thank you, Dr. Dredzi.
And thank you for the questions.
And we will go to Dr. O.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very honored to be presenting my view of AI in dementia care. Just way of introduction, I'm an associate professor in the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology. So I'm a clinician, I'm a geriatrician, which means that I'm a physician who takes care of older adults, 65 and over. But specifically, I'm the co-director of the Johns Hopkins Memory and Alzheimer's Treatment Center. So my clinical and research focus really has been in dementia field for many years. Next, please. So very brief slide on just dementia and Alzheimer's disease that I'm going to be talking about today. Dementia is just an umbrella term. Alzheimer's disease is one of the most common subtype of dementia. All in all, if you look at the data on Alzheimer's disease, we believe that 6.7 million adults 65 and older have Alzheimer's disease in the United States alone. And the total cost projected is supposed to be $345 billion in estimation on annual basis. Next, please. So we're really here to present to you how AI technology might be helpful for taking care of older adults with cognitive impairment, and really not just the patients themselves, but also care partners as well. So here we have a picture of many different things that are already either being used or in development. I just want to kind of showcase just a couple of things that, you know, we are actually doing at Johns Hopkins, especially in the space of memory care. I'm also part of what's called Precision Medicine Center of Excellence in Alzheimer's disease. So what we're doing in the Precision Medicine Center, which is really in collaboration with the memory clinic, is that we're looking at the larger data set, which we really didn't used to do before. So we have now access to the entire electronic health records of all the patients that we come to the memory clinic, as well as patients who are 65 and older in the community. So Johns Hopkins community physicians patients as well. And we can actually look at those data and really project, and that's what we're trying to do, is projection of cognitive trajectory. One of the things that I get asked, you know, very frequently in my clinic is, now I have a diagnosis of, you know, fill in the blank, maybe early stage Alzheimer's disease or pre-dementia, you know, what is going to happen to me from here? And often, you know, the really answer is not very clear. You might have seen them maybe once or twice. It's really hard to figure out where it's going to go from there based on very few meetings. But we're really trying to harness all of their medical records, which not just contains the history from clinic visits, but also their laboratory studies, imaging studies such as CT, MRI scans, as well as blood tests, pathology, anything they might have had, to really consolidate and use AI system, so artificial intelligence, to really guide us in figuring out where the cognitive trajectory goes. At this point, it's still in the research stage, but we hope to really continue to refine the process. In terms of patient care and what the patients are using, I would say it's more of a technology at this point. So for example, I have care partners who use I don't want to name brands, but really Amazon Echo, and it enables their parents to kind of stay at home as opposed to having to go into a skilled nursing facility. So they would have a screen where they can call and actually ask the parents to take the medication, and they can observe them actually taking the medication. And it actually really helps them because they live far away. The other one is sometimes I have patients who are wearing Fitbits, and they actually, without really knowing or having any symptoms, notice that their heart rates are very low, and they take themselves to the emergency departments. So, and these are all real life cases. So not necessarily artificial intelligence per se, but a lot of technology. And of course, a lot of these companies are collecting data as well. Environmental sensors are also in development. What that means is that a lot of people are developing technology to see, just by observing the gait, so how patients walk, you know, are they high risk for falls? Wearables, we talked about examples such as Fitbits, virtual reality platforms. What that means is that envision an iPad or iPhone or some or computer for that matter, where they might be able to actually interact with avatars, and that actually employs AI system. So the AI might read a patient's facial expression, the speech patterns, and actually kind of get to know them, so to speak, and actually start to learn how the patient behaves and actually interact with them in the future. So those are kind of things that are in development. Robots, Japan has spent over $300 million in robots. They were initially designed to really address the staff shortage that they have in Japan. And of course, in the United States, we have very similar problems as well. So robots can be more of a staff, addressing staff shortage issue, but I think the reality is that it's been more shown to be effective for providing companionship. Next, please. So I want to just kind of put in the context of, you know, what it means to have dementia. So in older adults, even though we're really talking about a brain disorder, I think it's really important to put in the context of everything that's happening in an older adult. So it's not just the memory loss as we would think about, but a lot of older adults have frailty. So they're very physically weak. They tend to develop chronic wounds. They could be malnourished. They have incontinence. They have diabetes, hypertension, a lot of other comorbidities or other medical problems. Next, please. And so it's very important that we put dementia care in the context of everything that's happening in older adult. And this schema is just showing, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's called artificial intelligence technology collaboratory, but a lot of things AI can be applied to really in supporting cognitive function, but that also really involves addressing everything else that's happening in older adult as well. Next, please. So this is just a slide. I know Dr. Battle is going to be talking about AITC, or the Artificial Intelligence Technology Collaboratory, so I would keep it very simple. But basically, it's an NIA, so National Institute on Aging, which belongs to NIH, funded grant awarded to Johns Hopkins University, University of Pennsylvania, and University of Massachusetts, which also includes the Harvard system. And what it is that actually we're trying to collaborate, promote technology, AI-based technology that a lot of companies are developing, perhaps in the early stages, middle stages, and actually help them with collaboration with academics in accelerating, actually bringing it to commercialization. Often what happens is that an idea is conceptualized. It takes a long time from product development to actually getting into the hands of people who really need the product. And really the goal of the grant is to really accelerate that process. Next, please. And what we're trying to do really in working with the companies, working with other academics who are involved in this space, is that not just really think about what we, the investigators, doctors, whoever that companies think the older adults need, especially in the space of cognitive impairment, but that it's imperative that we ask the patients, the stakeholders, so meaning their care partners, whether that be family members or friends, what is it that they need? And often the answer is actually different from what we think they need. So we, when we actually do stakeholder meetings, and this is work by Dr. Nancy Schwimburn, who's also part of AITC, is that they would, they say, I need an AI, I need technology, really assistance with activities and daily tasks, just really getting things done during the day. Companionship, they're very lonely. We talked about robots in Japan being used for companionship. Monitoring. My mom lives by herself far away, and I need a way for me to monitor, how she's doing, what she's doing. She has cognitive impairment. Education. I don't know how to take care of my father who has dementia. How do I get the education that I need? And so these are all these things that the stakeholders are saying we need technology help. Next, please. So I want to talk to you about the urgency of bringing AI and technology as one of the really important part of dementia care. And I want to really present to you the data about Maryland. We have unfortunate honor of being #1 in the United States of having the highest prevalence of Alzheimer's disease. This is the data that was published by Donna et al. In the Alzheimer's and Dementia Journal, which is the journal of the Alzheimer's Association. In 2023, we are #1 in prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, beating all 49 states. Next, please. And when they looked at actually by county, so they grouped Baltimore City as county, but we are at #2 in the nation. And actually, to be honest, it's tied at #1. Next, please. And so what is driving that number? And really the paper basically describes it as having high proportion of older adults. So if you're 85 and over, you have almost 15 times higher risk of Alzheimer's disease compared to somebody who's between 65 to 69 years of age. Women, also Black Americans, they all have much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And that is the reason why Maryland and Baltimore City have really high prevalence of Alzheimer's disease. Next, please. So this slide is really to talk about 2 points, which is that baby boomers, who are most of my patients, are basically technology adopters. They weren't really born with technology. They're having to learn and adapt technology. I would say that many are actually quite good at it, and they all became very good at operating Zoom during the pandemic for telemedicine. And then there's Gen Xers, who's also a technology adopter. We all know that millennials were born into technology, so they're actually digital natives. But this is to kind of demonstrate 2 points, which is that one, the current patients who have dementia need help in accessing technology, whether it's AI-based or not. So most likely, it's the care partners, maybe the children or grandchildren who are taking care of these patients who will be accessing these technology. But the sobering fact is that actually the millennials, who would now be the highest or the largest groups at 73 million, and they're digital natives and already accessing technology in a very different way from baby boomers and Gen Xers, will also become 65 starting 2045. And so we really need to be also ready for that. That actually is not really too far away. Next, please. The final slide is really talking about the equity issue and why this is so important. What we found out during the pandemic was that when a lot of things became virtual, so including for dementia care, Alzheimer's Association support groups and things like that, became on Zoom, that certain parts of the city were not able to really have the vibrant support groups that they used to have. Because even if you have iPad, even if you have iPhone or technology, if you don't have access to Wi-Fi or internet access, and many people do not, then you're forever in the digital divide on the wrong side. So that when we're talking about AI, when we're talking about technology, we really need to be aware that many of our citizens do not have access to broadband, and that we also need to be thinking in terms of, in a very, how do we address in a very equitable sense in providing really state-of-the-art dementia care? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. O. Please stay with us for a minute while we ask if there are any questions from the committee. Any questions for Delegate Bandari?
Thank you, panel from Johns Hopkins. As we explore the integration of AI into healthcare, our key concern is balancing technological innovation with ethical consideration and patient safety. Could you share insight on how Johns Hopkins is addressing these challenges, particularly in sensitive areas like memory and dementia treatment, and what protocol or ethical guidelines are being implemented to ensure that AI is used responsibly in patient care and medical research?
Great, thank you. So we consider those factors that you had just mentioned to be one of the really foremost concerning things. I, as a geriatrician, I am very protective of my patients, and certainly things like data breach and so on are biggest concern to us as well. So in terms of the big, large data set that we're using, obviously those are not really, none of the data points are really associated with names or medical record numbers, de-identified as much as possible. But also the companies are also trying to address this upfront. So for example, we talked about sensors that kind of monitor patients to see if they're fall risk. So one intrusive way of doing that would be just having a video monitoring system. But often those things are installed in nursing homes and assisted living facilities where patients actually, this is their home. So the technology that a lot of companies are coming up with is the sensors actually placed outside of the room. They can still actually track patients, but what's actually visualized on the monitor is actually almost like a stick figure, almost like a cartoon character, a stick figure. So there's no way you can identify who the person is. However, you can actually track the movements using those, sometimes it's a radio frequency monitor. So there are many different technologies. So technology companies are very much aware of the fact that data breach is a very important issue that they should really address from upfront. And we're really working with companies when we're going through the AITC review process that all those things are in place.
Yes. Any further questions? Yes. I will go with Delegate Alston first and then Delegate Bagnall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to know if there's any data that shows how these adaptive technologies deal with people who have systematic paranoia as a result of their dementia diagnoses. And how are the patients able to deal with it when part of the problem is that they're constantly forgetting?
So maybe I'll ask the question actually to you in a different way. Do you mean neuropsychiatric symptoms as part of dementia syndrome, or are you asking whether it's they know that they're being monitored and it's causing them to be have basically paranoia?
The first one.
Okay, yeah, so behavioral symptoms, associated with dementia, which we call as neuropsychiatric symptoms, that would be, agitation, irritability, and so on. There some technology that is trying to address that. So one of the technology we talked about was actually virtual reality programs. What we find is that probably the number one reason why patients with dementia have behavioral problems is because, simply put, they have no activities, they are bored, they have they're kind of isolated. So by keeping them active, and that's the reason why a lot of people are recommended to go to daycare, but often it's a very expensive process and somebody has to be there to make sure that they're on the bus to go to daycare center and so on. So the virtual reality platform is trying to address that, which is the neuropsychiatric symptoms or behavioral problems. And so that actually so some of the kind of things that are in development would be, they might have an iPad or a laptop. They would, once again, I mentioned about the avatar, who actually interacts with the patient. And some of them are more sophisticated than others, but using the AI system, they're learning what the patient is like. And some of these things also can actually read the facial features and so on. And they actually change the response based on that. So those are kind of things that people are trying to work on, providing, really companionship activities and so on. Now, in terms of, the fact that their fundamental problem for dementia patients is actually memory loss. And so in terms of operating the technology itself, I think they will definitely have to have assistance. So it's not, so once again, we can have technology, sophisticated technology, but obviously just giving the technology to the patients who have cognitive impairment would not be adequate. It would need a staff member or care partner at home who actually assists the patient with that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. O. Delegate Bagnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. One of the things we as legislators and I know as clinicians as well that we're always concerned about is exploitation, coercion, abuse of our elder populations, particularly our elder populations with cognitive deterioration. How are we looking at AI to ensure that is somewhat neutral? And is there an opportunity to utilize AI to protect against exploitation, to identify if that is a potential in the care of our elderly population with dementia?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that's a very important topic. I'm not aware of like one product that is trying to address that. Certainly, unfortunately, I have seen really many cases where the children are bringing their parents to see me because the first time they discovered that there was something wrong was when mom transferred $40,000 to somebody, who she met over social media. Those are kind of stories that I hear. I think what I'm not sure about AI per se, but technology allows really for care partners is actually closer monitoring. We had talked about just the Amazon Echo and things like those kind of things where children can actually have almost like a FaceTime with the patients and actually really monitor, what they're doing and so on. At a very simple level, even without having a very high level technology, many care partners, especially children, out to actually handle or sign up their parents for online accounts or automated pay in order to kind of alleviate those kind of catastrophic events that, tend to happen. But I think that is one area that, I would love to kind of work with a lot of people in really thinking about, how can we actually use the technology we have to protect the property of our older adults and actually, prevent other forms of abuse that they might be facing.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Dr. O, for your presentation and for the work that you're doing with your patients, and you're taking the time to answer our questions. So thank you, and we look forward to good information moving forward in the use of this technology. I'm going to move to Dr. Battle.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. So my name is Alexis Battle, and I'm a professor of biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins with appointments also in computer science and genetic medicine. So my own research in my lab focuses on development of machine learning and statistical methods for analyzing large-scale genetic and diverse patient data. So this helps us understand, diagnose, and treat diseases ranging from heart disease to rare childhood disorders. Also at Johns Hopkins, I am the director of the Malone Center for Engineering and Healthcare, which is a large center including both engineering faculty and clinicians, with over 50 affiliated faculty working on a really wide range of technologies that I'm happy to discuss with you. I'm also the deputy director for the new Data Science and AI Institute that you may have heard Hopkins is now announced and spinning up. So I'll start by first expressing my really tremendous excitement about the potential for AI and machine learning to revolutionize healthcare in the coming years. As my colleagues have expressed, the advances that are taking place are really, truly inspiring. So the first thought that I want to highlight is that I think that AI can improve broader access to high quality healthcare, and with the right design may actually be able to improve health equity. So not everyone can get to Johns Hopkins hospitals. Not everyone can even get to a big city or a big clinic, but an algorithm, an AI approach can be deployed anywhere. So this is actually one of the motivations that we've discussed for many years in the Malone Center. It's exactly this, that computation and engineering solutions are scalable and can be deployed broadly. So my family in rural Texas, who in some cases have had perhaps suboptimal care for some of their conditions, could actually access some of the same approaches that we have access here in Hopkins and other high quality institutions around Baltimore. So this is something that I'm really particularly excited about. AI also has the potential, if we construct it correctly, to actually monitor and detect biases in our healthcare systems, both those that are driven by AI automated systems and potentially also in the diagnoses and treatment that are driven by human clinicians. So this point overall is that the availability, scalability, and potential to hand tune and help design AI systems directly may actually improve access and fairness in some facets of healthcare that can be driven by AI. My next point is that I'll suggest that AI can augment and supplement clinician abilities and human clinician abilities in particular. So AI may actually be specifically really good at some things that human clinicians are not good at. So people are not naturally good at ingesting large quantities of numerical data, often in forms that are not organic languages or natural images. So for example, I mentioned that I work in genetics and genomics. It is very hard for a human clinician, even those in genetic medicine, to look at an entire human genome sequence and determine what might be causing a patient disease. And in fact, we know that right now, people who come to genetic clinics, which is actually about 5% of Americans are estimated to have a rare genetic disorder. Of these, about half of the individuals who come to clinic currently go undiagnosed. But my lab and many others around the country are developing new methods based on machine learning and artificial intelligence that can take in not only an entire human genome sequence, but also other data from the same patient, such as protein measurements, electronic health records, and more, to really improve our ability to diagnose the causes of some of these rare diseases that are affecting individuals. But this is not the only type. So complex long time course data multimodal data that spans imaging, lab results, et cetera, over, lots and lots of time points can be particularly hard for human clinicians to ingest. But AI, I think overall, has the potential to really augment clinician abilities rather than only replace by contributing its ability, and it's sort of, and it does not care if data comes to it in the form of natural language or numbers or anything, or how big or complex that data is. AI has the potential to augment human abilities in this case. And perhaps as a subtask of things that AI is better at, I will argue that AI is better at not getting bored with repetitive tasks such as paperwork, charts, trivial messaging, and things like that. And technologies such as large language models, ChatGPT-like models, may be able to lighten the load of some of this type of activity. And we know that clinicians are facing quite a significant problem of burnout right now, especially during and after the pandemic. So this is a particular area that I think it can help. But overall, AI is making really rapid progress and holds tremendous potential to improve healthcare in many aspects of our clinical systems. However, there are cons. So there are limitations and risks of using AI in an application that's as sensitive as healthcare, which is truly life and death decisions. So we cannot just deploy these AI systems without attention to errors, bias, and how people will actually interact with the systems in practice. So very broadly, we have to be prepared for AI to make errors. And when I say prepared, I mean prepared psychologically as patients and as clinicians, legally and practically. So, who will be sued for malpractice if AI is making medical decisions? Will it be the hospital, the attending, the people who designed the software? We have not prepared for this fully. How will patients respond to an AI system that perhaps is as good as a clinician in some cases of decision making, but it makes errors? People may respond very, very differently. Will clinicians begin to disregard an AI system after it makes a critical error and not want to pay attention to it anymore? So we have to assume that errors will be made, including some dangerous errors. We need to prepare for them, decide what error rates we can tolerate. Does AI need to be as good as a first-year resident? Does it need to be as good as the best clinician? What are we willing to accept? As a second point of risk, as my colleague Dr. Dredzy mentioned, AI can reflect and amplify biases that already exist in our healthcare system, including worse performance for patients of certain genetic ancestries, ethnicities, socioeconomic status, and others, if we're not very careful about addressing this. So AI will reflect any biases that are in the training data, whether that bias exists from existing discrimination in our healthcare system, if it exists due to disease prevalence, or if it exists simply due to our ability to collect training data in appropriate representative groups. So this has been demonstrated already in many clinical applications of AI. In my own field of genomics, there's a known trend that the vast majority of genetic data available for training right now comes from European ancestry, generally white individuals. The majority of our genetic data available has that property. So we know that our genetic risk prediction, so predicting risk of disease from the genome, is not as accurate in other groups. There are some truly terrifying examples of this problem, including people using genetic risk prediction for embryo selection, where in some cases, these methods, due to lack of training data, predict higher risk for individuals of non-European ethnicity, which may actually bias applications such as embryo selection, which I think is truly terrifying when I think about those possibilities. So systems across the board must be evaluated for risk and designed to avoid and even mitigate the risks that already exist in our healthcare system. So finally, I want to emphasize that the human monitoring and oversight of AI needs to be tested and tracked. So we know from applications outside of healthcare, such as air traffic control or self-driving cars, that when people are supposed to oversee an automated system or really babysit what an automated system is doing, there's a great risk that that task becomes very mundane. So if a clinician doesn't like filling out paperwork, are they going to like having to read in detail the paperwork that an AI system has filled out, pay attention to it in detail, and catch all the errors? Our experience in other applications suggests that this is a problem. People get complacent and bored and fail to attend to their task. So if a system, for example, gets a diagnosis code correct the first 19 times you use it, you may not pay so much attention after that. So there need to be checks and actually system design, human computer interface solutions to ensure human oversight when it's intended. It's not enough to deploy an AI system and then simply say, don't worry, a doctor's overseeing it. So it's not really an AI solution, it's really the doctor. Oversight is not the same thing as actually participating directly. So overall, we're not ready to blindly launch AI solutions in healthcare. We must pay attention to preparedness for errors, potential for bias, and the actual interfaces involved where real people are using them. So because of these things, I do believe that there will be a need for regulation of AI in healthcare, just as we have regulation of devices in healthcare and drugs and even oversight of human-provided care. We will need oversight of AI care. So we should consider necessary regulations for the appropriate use of AI in healthcare, the disclosure of its use to patients, the transparency of these systems, their understandability, and actually I'm going to emphasize, I don't think it's been brought up, regulation about the availability and privacy of training data that these systems are using. So a few key points surrounding data. What data must be shared for ensuring equity, access to quality care, evaluation, or transparency, particularly if these systems make errors, but how do we balance this with the definite need for patient privacy? So one thing that I want to highlight in regard to deciding on how to regulate AI is the need to include experts, both from engineering, computer science, AI side, and clinicians themselves, in addition to representatives of the groups that will be directly affected by this, patients, the community, etc. There's also a risk, I think, of taking too much direction from individuals with financial interests. So I do think industry is moving so quickly in AI. There's a lot of really exceptional experts there. I myself have spent time in industry, but we do need to consider what are the interests of the people who are guiding, if these are the experts, who is guiding our decisions about making regulations. So I strongly advocate bringing together individuals from industry, but also individuals from academia and from the community as these regulations are being considered. So overall, I hope that this panel and the participation by my colleagues has raised your interest in the potential of AI to dramatically improve healthcare, but also highlighted some areas of concern. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. Thank you very much. Questions for Dr. Battle? Delegate Shalega.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And thank you for being here. I have a two-part question. I think one part is for Mr. Huber and the other part is for Dr. Battle. So you had talked about using AI within the healthcare system. And my question would be, would AI then potentially make triage decisions? And you had said that it would reflect and amplify biases in the training system. And I would just point out a concern where the chief diversity officer, who's also a physician at Hopkins, recently put out a list of people she deemed privileged, and one of those characteristics was a religious discrimination. So, would there be some way to stop an algorithmic bias that may have potentially been part of a training system? And then for Mr. Huber, what steps is the university taken or the medical system taken with regards to Dr. Golden and this particular memo, especially in light of the fact that a physician who allegedly made an anti-Palestinian post was put on leave, and she put this out on the Hopkins banner. So I don't know if you want to go first or Dr. Battle.
Maybe I'll start first. So I do think there's research into AI being used to triage certain aspects, such as triaging questions that come in through MyChart and applications like that, where a medical question may come in, or a question on MyChart that turns out not to be medical, but just a scheduling question. There's research into AI helping to triage those or helping to evaluate which patients really need to connect with a clinician immediately. None of those systems are suggesting removing humans from the loop entirely at this point. I don't think you are at risk of showing up at a Hopkins hospital and AI says, no, you don't get to be seen today. But research is going into how well these systems are able to decide where to send people in this complex system where we know it's already a problem that, you may call your doctor's office and be on hold for hours and then not even reach the person that you want. So if we can improve that, I think there's potential there. You noted some risks of bias. So, human clinicians definitely have bias. We know this everywhere. And if their diagnoses are in our electronic health records, which they are, and that's what we're using to train some of these systems, the AI systems may reflect them. The good thing I will note is that if we attend to that problem, we are more able to evaluate that because the AI system is able to be tested on, thousands, millions of cases. We can actually assess, is there some bias based on male versus female? Is there some bias based on, self-disclosed ethnicity? Is there a bias based on religion? We can look at that on these large-scale systems being applied across many, many people, actually probably easier than we could assess it, for example, for a specific individual clinician in most cases. So yes, I think that potential absolutely exists. I will highlight it as something that we have to evaluate for any system that we deploy, but I think it is something we can evaluate and actually start to mitigate.
Yeah. And I'll just say the email you referred to, that it was retracted and there was an apology issued that came from leadership from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and the health system. Although the institution stands by its commitments to equity and inclusion, the email was not expressed in a way that they felt reflected the values of the institution or made the points that it was seeking to make. As far as any comparisons to other members of the faculty or employees, that's something that I would need to get some guidance on, since it's a personnel matter, before addressing in a public setting.
Delegate White Howland, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe my question is ill-timed, but I thought it would be helpful for us to maybe marry some of the conversation that we had yesterday. And Delegate Shalega, the word triage came to mind, so it made me think about this. But we had discussed on yesterday about ED wait times and hospital throughput. And so while I know that we have spent some time discussing here about the AI technologies within the clinical settings, but when it comes to process and when it comes to addressing this larger issue around ED wait times, it makes me wonder what solutions could AI afford us in triaging and potentially addressing this issue that we expounded upon yesterday with ED wait times and hospital throughput. So has there been any thought about what that could look like and how that could help inform future steps that some of our stakeholders have elevated even on yesterday?
I think that's an area where AI has a lot of potential to assist. So some of the places that it may be able to assist include if we're able to free up clinician time and staff time where they're not so overburdened with paperwork and other tasks that AI can do for them that are not patient facing, they will have more time to actually directly interact with the patients. And I think that will improve the throughput of all of the clinics that we are talking about, including the ED. So that's one thing that I will highlight. Again, the ability of AI to help triage is possible. It is something that I think is sensitive and still is in research phases of where and how that could be deployed and where a human in the loop. Again, we discussed earlier, human babysitting AI or overseeing AI, you have to be very careful exactly how you deploy that and test it, not just assume that human oversight is sufficient and not to have to worry about AI making mistakes anymore. But I do think that's a place where AI can help as well. There are so many steps of what happens in the ED, and that ranges from getting radiology to read your CT scan, from the first interaction with triage, with the first nurse, with the first doctor, with the specialist. Many of these steps can be assisted by AI to improve their speed and to free up clinician time.
Good. Seeing no further questions, I thank you, Dr. Battle, Dr. O, Dr. Dredzy and Mr. Huber for your presentation. Very informative and I think we did pretty well on time. To the committee, thank you very much for your great questions and engagement with this process. I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend. And I will let you know that we will actually, while we will have a few more briefings, we will actually start bill hearings next Tuesday. So check and make sure if you've got a bill and being heard next Tuesday, you want to make sure that you are prepared for that. Other than that, have a wonderful weekend and we'll see you next week. Oh, sorry. Yes.